Hello, Girlsplainers! Welcome back to Girlsplaining Gaming. Today, we're gonna go back to the basics. Let's talk about a Magic the Gathering glossary. Now, I'm gonna go over a ton of different terms. I haven't even counted them. If you can guess now how many there are, and then you get the closest, maybe you'll get something. I don't know, that'd be cool. So I'm going to give you a bunch of categories, a bunch of definitions. Now, these are not the word for word literal book definitions. I'm aiming to be accurate, but I want to do the layperson's version. I want to make this understandable if you are new to the game, or if you're a seasoned player who just isn't up on some of the new terms, or, for anybody who needs a little reminder. So let's get right into it, and bear with me because this is going to be a long one. So for our first category, I've got the basic archetypes of a deck. I've put 4. Some people say there's 3. I've chosen 4. First of all is control. Control is a deck archetype and a strategy that is trying to disrupt your opponents using active effects. This is usually in blue. Aggro. This is a fast and aggressive strategy. It's going to try to kill you before you can become a threat. It has a low mana curve, and this usually involves red. Mid-range. This is, as you might guess, in between aggro and control. It has enough removal to deal with the aggro decks while having threats to pressure the control decks. Combo. This is a combination of cards that ends the game, often in an infinite loop kind of scenario. This is usually 2 to 3 cards, and it also refers to the strategy where these are employed. That's probably the shortest category. Let's move on to playstyles and other archetypes. Stacks. This is an important one to know. Some people really don't like it. This is a strategy that focuses on limiting what your opponents can do. This is with blanket effects, like taxing things and making it harder for them to play. You'll often find this in white and a little bit in blue. Voltron. This is a strategy where you put a lot of enhancement cards on one creature. A lot of times, this is your commander, and those are usually either aura or equipment cards. In a Spellslinger deck, you'll have cards out that care about casting instants and sorceries. And then you cast a lot of instants and sorceries, and you get a lot of effects. Similar to this, but not exactly the same, is Storm, and that's a variation of Spellslinger. It's a keyword that has effects based on how many spells have been cast on this turn, but the key is that the payoff is usually at the end for Storm, and the payoff can be throughout it in a lot of Spellslinger strategies. These are often found in red and blue. Stompy. Play big creature. Attack with big creature. Win. Mill. Milling is a keyword, but it is also a deck strategy and archetype. This is when you make a player put cards from their library directly into their graveyard. You could be doing that to somebody else, or you could be doing it to yourself. Aristocrat. This is a strategy where you are sacrificing your own creatures. You're often going to have cards that have abilities based on entering or leaving the battlefield, or when you sacrifice a creature. Burn. This is a strategy where you are dealing non-combat damage to a target, whether that be a creature, planeswalker, or an opponent. So, typal, kindred, tribal, what's the difference? Are they all the same thing? Kind of. So, all 3 of these refer to a deck or a mechanical theme that is centered around a shared creature type. Now, Wizards of the Coast stopped using the word tribal to describe this, and they started using the word kindred. But in the meantime, other people had started using typal instead, retiring the term tribal. They all kind of mean the same thing. Yeah. Group Hug is a strategy that is pretty exclusive to Commander. This is a strategy where you are providing resources or benefits to your opponents in exchange for agreements, politics, favors, things like that. You might be using that politics to win the game, or later you might be using those other resources to win the game. All right, let's move on to some concepts. These are not necessarily actual mechanical parts of the game, but they are very important to it. Metagame. This is the game outside of the game. It's all decisions that are game related that are made when you're not actually playing in the game. So this is what cards you're putting into your deck, what deck you choose to play, things like that. Similar, but not exactly the same, is the meta, and that is the general consensus of people who are meta-gaming and making those kinds of decisions, so it's really the landscape of what play looks like at a certain time. Signals. I'm specifically talking about signals in a drafting scenario. This is when you can interpret different information from what's passed to you and what is not passed to you after you make your selections, so you can try to deduce what your opponents are taking and what their strategies are. I think this is super fun. Synergy is how well your cards work together. Card advantage. Now this one has a couple different definitions. This could be if a player just has more cards than others, that would be card advantage, or they do something to make that happen. Or it could be a set of actions where you net at least one card. So if you spend a card, like an instant or a sorcery, to draw a card, that is a net 0, and we would not consider that card advantage. But if you spend one card to draw 2 cards, that would be considered getting card advantage on that particular play. This episode, fueled but not sponsored by Duncan. Moving right along to our next category, this is things about gameplay. Super specific. A trigger. This is when a game condition is met that makes an ability happen. You'll often hear this in that triggers this ability. Priority. This is when a player is allowed to do anything. Nothing can happen in the game until all the players have received and passed priority without taking a game action. In casual games, this is usually assumed unless somebody specifically passes or does not pass priority, but it can make a real difference. Speaking of which, what's a game action? A game action is, you guessed it, any action that is related to the game. Drawing a card, choosing to attack, anything that you do in the game. Kind of related to these two is the stack. This is where spells and abilities live while they're trying to resolve. Here's a little bit of slang for you. This is decking yourself. That is when you mill yourself out of cards, or you get milled, or you just have such a long game that you run out of cards in your library and you lose the game. A board state is just the landscape of what the board looks like, and a stalled board is when neither player can progress the board state in a meaningful way. Another piece of slang is to scoop. That is just when you forfeit the game. There's a bit of a debate about whether scooping is allowed at instant or sorcery speed. If you are just playing a casual game, this doesn't really make a difference, and usually you won't be scooping anyway. The debate is because sometimes people use this as a way to screw over other players if there's something to do with attacks and triggers and multiple targets. So it's really about player etiquette, but not something that you have to worry about if you don't already know what scooping means, so you're all set. Next category, things to do with mana. If you are mana flooded, that means you keep drawing lands or mana sources and you really can't draw anything else, and that's not very good if you can't play anything. However, on the other hand, mana screwed isn't good either, which means you can't draw enough mana sources. A mana dork is a little creature that you can tap for mana, and a mana rock is similarly a little artifact that you can tap for mana. If you are tapped out, that means you have no more mana open. Mana fixing is things that help you get the colors of mana that you need. This could be a land that taps for multiple colors of mana, or something that helps you search your library for a basic land card to put onto the battlefield, as a couple of examples. The mana curve is the balance of cards of different mana costs in your deck. There's no one right answer to this. This is generally dependent upon your format and playstyle. Here's a bit of a miscellaneous category. We have spells, combat, and a few keywords. I decided not to put all the keywords in here because we could be going on forever, but if you want to see a video about keywords and a keyword glossary, what they do, let me know in the comments and I can definitely work on one of those. Evasion. This is not a keyword specifically, but it's when a creature has an ability like flying that makes it hard to block. Reach is the ability to block creatures with flying. Also, it can be referred to as an aggro deck's ability to win after it's lost its initial time advantage. That's less common though. A bomb. This is a really powerful card that could become a significant threat if it goes unanswered. A lot of times you'll be building around these in your decks. Chump block. This is when you block with a creature to maintain your life total even though you won't be trading and your creature is going to be the only one to die. A combat trick is an instant speed spell that affects the board state in your favor. During combat, this is usually improving or saving your creature. A modal spell is going to let you choose one or more options when you cast it. Sometimes this is for more mana, sometimes this is if a certain condition is met on the board. Bounce. This is when you return a card to a player's hand. The legendary rule. This is a rule that states you may only have one copy of a legendary permanent on the battlefield at one time. If you do happen to get more than one copy, you'll have to sacrifice one. Moving on, getting closer to the end, we've got game formats. There's so many Magic the Gathering formats, and I think this is one of the things that makes the game really special, is that you can find your niche, you can find your favorite way to play. They're all generally the same concept, but I think it really diversifies the game and makes it more accessible for people who want different styles to play. Starting off with a very common one, this is EDH, which stands for Elder Dragon Highlander. This is most commonly known as Commander. Commander is a 100-card singleton format, which means you have 100 cards in the deck, and you may only have one copy of each card in said deck. Of course, there's exceptions to this, but generally you can only have one. You'll have a commander, which lives in and can return to the command zone. This is generally a 4-player format. CEDH is the competitive version of EDH, which is generally known as a casual format, so that's why there is a separate name for the competitive version. Canadian Highlander is a 100-card singleton 1v1 format, but it uses a point system instead of a banned and restricted list to limit the available card pool. Standard is a 60-card minimum 1v1 format where you can have 4 copies of each card in your deck. This one uses a rotating pool of cards with sets expiring after 3 years-ish. Modern is very similar. It is also a 60-card minimum 1v1 deck where you can have 4 copies of each card, but this one is a non-rotating format, so you can use cards from 8th edition onward. That's going to be 2003. Historic is a MTG Arena exclusive format, and that's any card that has ever been, I would say, printed but used in MTGA. Legacy is an eternal format, which basically allows you to use any card ever printed. This is from all the sets that have the standard Magic the Gathering background that you're familiar with. So any card that has this, you could use in Legacy. Vintage is pretty much the same thing, but it has a different banned and restricted list. Pauper is pretty cool. This is a 60-card 1v1 format where the available card pool is limited to only commons, but commons that are printed in any set ever. And lastly, we get to one that I haven't tried yet, but I would be really pumped to do it, is Star, also known as Pentagram or 5-Point. This is a 5-player cooperative constructed format. So each player is going to represent one of the game's 5 colors. There's also an ally system that is key to the winning and losing of the game. It sounds really, really fun, and I hope that we'll be able to do an event of like Star at my local game store soon. Speaking of local game stores, let's move on finally to the types of events. I did mention just now something called Constructed, so let's get into that. Constructed is when you bring your own deck that you built at home from your own card pool with restrictions depending on the format, as opposed to a limited event where you open cards at the event and then you play with the limited card pool that you open. There's a couple different kinds of these. Basically, the two are sealed and draft. Sealed is where you open and build from your own packs only, and you don't get to touch anything that anybody else opens. But draft is where you open packs and you draft cards while passing packs between players. Congratulations if you got to the end of this. That was probably 10 minutes of me just spouting terms at you. I hope it was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you think I missed anything, if you want another video on something specific, or if you have any additions or updates to what I said. Okay, and that was 56 different terms. So if you guessed 56, you win. Congratulations. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more educational gaming videos, and I will see you next time.